Okay, we're going to be in chapter 8, verse 23. Let's begin reading in verse 23 here. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm on the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves. But he, Jesus, was asleep, and they went and they woke him, saying, "Save us, Lord, for we are perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" And then he arose and he rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. Just before this, we'll have to reach back into last week's sermon, but just before this, a scribe and a young man had come up to Jesus and said, "We want to follow you." And Jesus said, "Well, that's going to be very, very difficult. You better think it through," if you remember that. And here, it's kind of interesting that no sooner do they leave that his disciples follow him into the boat and they get out on the Sea of Galilee. And all of a sudden, notice there's this huge storm. So it doesn't take very long before things get rough for Jesus and his disciples. I want to kind of look at this idea just a little bit. The word that gets translated storm, and a great storm arose. The word there is seismos. Seismos, so it's interesting that they would translate it storm. I guess that's okay, but seismos is where we get our English word for seismic. What is seismic activity? Seismic activity is an earthquake, and that's the word that's actually used here. So there was some kind of a seismic, there was some kind of an earthquake. Tectonic plates are shifting underneath the Sea of Galilee, and it's causing this massive uproar in the sea there. Just a little bit of information on that area. There was something called the Dead Sea Fault System. You guys know what a fault line is. Whenever a fault line runs through an area, that area is unstable and it's subject to earthquakes. So the Dead Sea Fault System runs from, it's interesting, it runs all the way through Palestine. Starts down at the Dead Sea, down by Jerusalem. It follows all the way up the Jordan, and it goes all the way through the Sea of Galilee. That whole thing is a fault line. Let me show you a couple articles that were written about that fault line, that area there in Palestine. The seismic activity in Israel and its surrounding neighbors originates mainly from the active Dead Sea Fault System. That's kind of interesting. I bet most of us didn't know that. The article goes on to say, historical documents demonstrate that this system has produced destructive earthquakes ever since ancient times. The fault line that runs through there is so dangerous that the Israeli authorities in 2012 had to create what was called the EEWS, the Early Earthquake Warning System. They had to figure out a way to warn people about these earthquakes. And so that's what the scripture says was going on. There was a seismos, there was an earthquake going on, and there's the word megale right after seismos, megale. It was a mega earthquake. It also says that there was a massive wind, and the phrase that says, the ESV translates it, and the boat was swamped by the waves. You want to look at what your versions there says. The boat was being swamped by the waves. This is interesting. The word kalupto there. Kalupto is the word that gets translated swamped. The waves were crashing over the boat. But kalupto is an interesting word because it means to completely cover. The way bark covers a tree. Kalupto almost means to hide something by covering it. So the waves and the wind was so powerful and so large that these waves were coming over the boat and covering it and hiding it. So it was a bad situation. The reason I wanted to point out how desperate the situation was is I want you to be able to take in the scene, a megale earthquake, massive tectonic plates shifting underneath the Sea of Galilee, hurricane force winds with waves that are covering the boat. And then they wake Jesus up, and the scripture says immediately everything got calm. And the word megale gets used again. It didn't just get calm, but it got megale calm. It was a mega calm. Jesus, through just a spoken word, turned a mega earthquake, a mega storm, into mega calm. We've got to come to terms with what that means for us and what that means about the man Jesus. It tells us some Christology. It tells us about the person of Jesus, and what it tells us is that Jesus' word transcends science, if that makes sense to you. Jesus' word transcends nature. Jesus with a word can control nature. Jesus can tell nature what to do, and nature has to obey him. That puts Jesus in another realm, doesn't it? That makes Jesus transcendent. That makes Jesus something otherworldly for someone to be able to do that. It means that Jesus transcends science. Jesus goes beyond what science is. And I kind of wanted to draw that home today. Let's just look at this idea of science. What is the idea of science? Science is the systemic study of the structure and behavior of the natural world. Science looks at nature and figures out how nature works. So science is a wonderful field, a valid field that's helped accomplish all kinds of things. But what I want to draw home to us is science stops at nature. And what Jesus did takes us beyond nature. What Jesus did transcends nature. What Jesus did was supernatural. Just to stop for a moment there, Jesus operates in the supernatural, beyond what nature can do. And so it is concerning where science is a great field, science is a valid field. The problem with the field is that scientists want to stop at nature. They don't want to recognize anything supernature. They don't want to go beyond the boundaries and the limits of nature. They don't want to recognize the supernatural. They don't want to recognize the one that has power and authority over nature, the one who tells nature what to do. That's unfortunate because they've embraced a wonderful field, but they refuse to accept that there is anything greater than nature itself. So they're only willing to observe what is natural. They're unwilling to go beyond what is natural into the supernatural. And yet Matthew records for us, as do the other Gospels, that Jesus is supernatural. Matthew demands that his disciples place Jesus beyond the natural realm into the supernatural realm, in charge of nature, so that nature has to obey Jesus. If we go beyond that to the next verse, chapter 8 and verse 27, we read, and the men marveled, saying, "What kind of a man is this, that even the wind and the sea obeys him. I would put a square around the word what kind. That's an interesting word in the Greek. What kind of a man is this? In the English, it doesn't bear the weight of what the Greek word uses. Potapeng, potapos. I forgot what it is exactly. But the phrase is only used when somebody can't explain what they're seeing. So the phrase gets used when Mary is greeted by the angel and the angel tells Mary, you're going to have a child. Mary says, potapeng. What kind of a greeting is this? I don't understand what's happening right now. There's an angel in my house and I don't understand what's going on. That's what the word means. Unfortunately, when we translate it, what kind, we don't get it. In, I believe it's 1 John. I might be wrong. It's 1st, 2nd, or 3rd John. John says, behold, what kind of love the Father has for us that he would call us children. And he uses this word, what kind? It's like, it's beyond fathoming that God would call us his children. I can't understand how that's possible. And the phrase also gets used when the disciples are walking with Jesus and they look back and they see the temple and they see the big stones that were used to make the temple. And they say, potapin, Jesus, what kind of stones are these? I can't fathom how they moved these humongous stones. It's beyond my understanding. I love the word because it only pops up in very few places. And when it does pop up, it means something very special. Here, they're saying potapeng about Jesus. I don't understand this guy. I don't get him. How is he able to do this? How is he able to control nature with his words? It would be good for us to spend a little bit of time dwelling on that concept. What kind of man is this that he can tell the wind and the sea what to do? In addition, the word they obey him, I don't know what your translation has there, obey him. The root of that word is akuo, to hear or to listen. So the word that gets translated obey in the Greek is this idea of listening. And so the translation would be something like, how is it that the wind and the waves listen to him? And of course, that means do what he says, obey him. But the men are absolutely amazed. How does nature listen to Jesus? The earthquake and the wind and the waves listened to Jesus. They obeyed him. And I think there's kind of an antithesis in the stories that we're going to read, in the miracles that we're going to read. We're going to see that over and over, that things in the supernatural realm obey Jesus. We just looked, number one, the miracle is that nature listens to Jesus. It does what he says. We're going to find out in the next miracle when Jesus casts out demons, we're going to find out that demons, akuo, they listen to what Jesus says. The demons obey Jesus. And in the third miracle, a body that is racked by disease, a paralyzed man, the paralyzed body listens to Jesus. It does what Jesus tells it to do. So, how is that possible? What kind of man is this that nature and demons and a diseased body all have to listen to him and obey what he says? But we're still looking for the dilemma in creation. What is the one dilemma in creation? Let's go on to the second miracle here. The demons obey Jesus in this miracle. We'll pick up in verse 28. And when he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men met him coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass that way. And behold, they cried out, "What have you to do with us, O Son of God? Let's just pause right there, verse 29. What have you to do with us, O Son of God? I want to focus on that phrase, Son of God. Jesus has been calling himself the Son of Man, a very humble term. Here the demons recognize him. They know exactly who he is. This is the Son of God, and so they recognize him. The creatures, the demons that exist in the supernatural realm, also obey and listen to Jesus. Evil is what exists beyond nature, beyond what scientists can study or fathom. It's beyond that. Evil exists in the supernatural, beyond the natural. I want to remind us that when we read chapter 4, if you'll remember, when Satan tempted Jesus in the wilderness, every time that Satan had a temptation for Jesus, Satan said, "If you are the Son of God, do this." 3 or 4 times. If you're the Son of God, then do this. Satan was trying to get the Son of God to be a son of Satan. Satan was trying to get the Son of God who should only be obeying God. Satan wanted to try to get Son of God to obey Satan. So he used the term, if you are the Son of God. Son of God refers to an anointed person. We'll remember in, I believe it was Psalm chapter 2. Psalm chapter 2, I won't read it, but it talks about an anointed one. It was anointed one, someone that would be a king. That was this idea of a son of God. I believe Psalm chapter 2 spells that out for us. So they're acknowledging this is the king. This is the Son of God. And let me take you guys back to Deuteronomy. If you want to turn to Deuteronomy 17. The Son of God, anytime there was a king in Israel, the Mosaic Law told that king exactly what God expected of that king. And so where the demons are calling Jesus the Son of God, the king, they recognize who he is. I want you guys to know, what did Jesus study in order to understand what a king is supposed to do? So Deuteronomy chapter 17, I've kind of just selected certain parts of the verses so you could see the idea quickly here. But I'm going to start in verse 16 and kind of walk you quickly through this. This is what a king is supposed to do, a king of Israel. Verse 16, only he must not acquire many horses, and he shall not acquire many wives, and he shall not acquire excessive silver and gold. Now, let me just explain each of those. Not to acquire many horses or chariots, that was an army. So God said, when my king comes, I don't want my king to acquire a massive army. He must not acquire many wives, because he said the wives will distract you and turn your heart away from your God. So don't acquire many wives. And finally, don't acquire excessive silver and gold. Don't worry about being rich. Those were the requirements of Israel's king. This is why Jesus didn't come with an army. This is why Jesus didn't get married. And this is why Jesus wasn't rich. Jesus was poor. Jesus was single. Jesus didn't have an army. He was fulfilling what the God of heaven expected of the kings of Israel. We miss that. Not many people are aware that there were directions for a king. Now, this is what the things that God does not want the king to do. These are the things that you don't do. But also in Deuteronomy, also in chapter 17, there's a list of things that God does want his king to do. Let's watch these. Verse 18. When he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law. That was the law of Moses. Verse 19, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, that he can learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and the statutes and do them. Don't have an army, don't accumulate wives, don't accumulate wealth, but do write down all the words of my law, do study this book of the law, and do be careful to obey all of these commandments. And isn't that an exact picture of what Jesus did? It's interesting to know that when Jesus rebuked Satan, you'll remember every time Satan said, if you are the Son of God, the King that Deuteronomy is talking about, if you are that King, then do this. And you remember Jesus already always answered him with a Bible verse. It is written. Well, we're reading from Deuteronomy, and I want you to know that all of the times when Jesus quotes to Satan, it is written, he was quoting from Deuteronomy chapter 5 through Deuteronomy chapter 8. Jesus had done exactly what God had told the king of Israel to do. So in chapter 4, Satan says, if you are the Son of God, this king. Notice now in chapter 8, these demons don't mess around with the if anymore. What have you come fear for, Son of God? Now it's been established, now it's beyond a doubt. Jesus is the King of Israel, and these demons recognize it. Let me put a pause right here, guys, just for a minute. I'm going to put a pin right there. I can't help but at least touch on this because we're commanded to contend for the faith. We're commanded to contend for the truth of the gospel. I want you guys to recognize that the demons just confessed Jesus as Christ, didn't they? What do you want with us, Son of God? The demons confessed Christ. But are the demons saved? We need to just ponder for just a minute right there, guys. And it's difficult to point things out because people believe what they're taught. They don't always know how to find the right scripture. And there are many that say all you have to do is confess the name of Christ. Call on His name. That's all you have to do. That's it, and you're saved. Just confess His name. But it's obvious here that the demons are confessing Jesus as the Son of God, and that is not salvific. There's another component to confessing Christ, and the other component is to become obedient to Christ. James brings this up. I'm only going to touch on it quickly. Oh, I gave you Peter. I forgot. Confessing Christ. The demons do the same thing that Peter did. Matthew 16 and 15. Jesus says to Peter, "What about you?" Jesus said. "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter said, "You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God." But isn't that the same thing that the demons just did? So I want to take you to one more verse. It's a partial gospel. The idea of just calling on the name, the idea of just confessing the name is only a partial part of the gospel. James is going to clear it up for us. James chapter 2. James is going to say, no, there's got to be a life that submits itself to the authority of Jesus. Now that's what distinguishes disciples from the demons. A lifetime of submitting yourself to the authority of Christ. Look at what James said in James chapter 2 and verse 19. James is combating this idea about faith, but faith that doesn't do anything, faith that doesn't help people, faith that doesn't bear the righteousness that Jesus has asked for. And he's trying to help the people see, is faith without obedience of any use whatsoever? And he says, no, it's not. Verse 19, you believe that God is one. Well, you do well. Even the demons believe, and they shudder. Do you want to be shown, O foolish person, that faith without works is useless? So there's a partial gospel floating around in our culture today. The second part of it is what James reveals. There is a confessing Christ as a half of it, but there is a subjection to Jesus as your Lord, walking in righteousness and obedience to His commandments that is what is salvific. I just kind of did a little detour there. We need to know that information. And just remember that when that comes up, the demons confessed Christ and they're not saved. Let me get back to our verse. Matthew chapter 8, we're going to look at the second part of verse 29. Notice what the demons say. They call Jesus Son of God. They know who He is. And then they say in verse 29, have you come here to torment us before the time? Are you here early, Jesus? Jesus, you're here too early. The demons are aware. Let me point out this word torment. You might put a square around the word torment. Basanizo is the word that gets translated torment. And the idea of basanizo means any kind of suffering, any kind of torment or pain. The demons are saying, have you come here to basanizo, to torment us, to cause us to suffer, to inflict pain on us? And the key word is before the time. We know the demons are confessing. We know that it's coming. We know that our time of torment and suffering is coming. But we're surprised that you're already here because the time has not come yet. I wanted to point out the word basanizo because we saw that word earlier in chapter 8. Do you remember when the centurion came to Jesus and told Jesus, my servant or my child is at home. He's paralyzed and he is suffering. Basanizo. The pain and the suffering that Satan inflicts on God's children is the pain and the suffering that God will inflict on Satan at the appointed time. Basanizo. It's the same word. Let me just kind of allude to this later on in Matthew. Jesus makes known that the time is coming. Matthew chapter 25 and verse 41, then He will say to those on His left, depart from me, you who are accursed, into the eternal fire that was prepared for the devil and his demons. The devil and his angels. The demons know that there is an appointed day, a day of judgment, when they are going to be cast into an eternal fire that's been prepared for them and the demons. But what's curious about our statement is they know the day is coming, but they're perplexed. They don't understand, why are you already here now? That's a surprising statement. It's too early. It's not time for that yet. It's amazing that demons recognize this. Why have you come? And then 3 words, before the time. That's exactly the Greek, before the time. This is the idea that you're already here, but the time is not yet. In scholarly circles, there is the idea of already and not yet. Normally, it's talked about eschatology, and normally it's used for the idea of the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. A lot of times, Jesus said, the kingdom is at hand. The kingdom is here. And yet, we also realize, but the kingdom gets ushered in when God brings Judgment Day and does away with all the evil in the world, and then Jesus will hand the kingdom over to the Father, and the kingdoms of the world will become the kingdoms of the Father. So we use this idea of eschatology. It's already here and not yet. And this is a great way to kind of wrap our mind. The kingdom of heaven is already here and not yet. And what we mean by that is it's almost like if you win the lottery. If you win the lottery and you've got that magic ticket in your hand, but you haven't gone and claimed it yet, you're a millionaire, aren't you? But not yet, right? Does that make sense? You've got the winning ticket, you're in possession, so technically you're a millionaire because you've got a winning ticket that's worth $1 million, but you don't have the $1 million yet. So you're already one and you're not yet one. And one of the best examples of that is right here. The demons we know the time is coming, but not yet. It's not here yet, they say. And then what's interesting, the story goes on if we keep looking at our verse. The demons asked Jesus to be cast into a swine of pigs. And Jesus allows it, and then the pigs run off a cliff and go into the water and they drown themselves. And whoever owned those pigs just lost a lot of money, didn't he? Fair market value on those pigs. Hopefully he had insurance on that. But we skip through that, and all the people from the town, I want you to notice, all the people from the town come out. The demons ask, cast us in the pigs. Jesus says, go, and the demons go. So again, Jesus has this supernatural power over supernatural forces. So even the demons listen to Jesus and obey Jesus, and look at how the crowd from the city responds to this awesome event. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 34. Behold, all the city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they thanked him so much for coming. Oh my goodness, isn't that the response we expect? Thank you, we're so glad you're here. Thank you for casting out the demons. Thank you for bringing us joy, for healing us, for giving us our vision back, for casting out leprosy. Thank you for being here, Jesus. Isn't that always the response that we expect when we talk to people about Jesus? But we notice something very strange here. That's not the reception that Jesus gives. We're surprised and we're shocked by this, but it says they begged him to leave. Please leave. We don't want you here. There's one major dilemma in creation. In our miracle stories, the first miracle is nature listens to Jesus. In our second miracle story, the demons listen and obey Jesus. In our third miracle story, a body that is racked by disease listens and obeys Jesus. The only thing that doesn't want to obey Jesus are the people. The one dilemma of creation is that God controls everything except for the people. God gives people the freedom, the free choice to say, no, I don't want you. Please leave. Nature can't reject God. The demons cannot reject God. Bodily illnesses cannot reject God, but people are able to say, please leave. I don't want you. I don't want you here. And with that simple word, Jesus left. Jesus did what the people wanted him to do. Jesus says, okay, if you don't want me in your life, I will not force myself into your life. I will leave if you ask me to. That's the one dilemma in all of creation. God will leave if somebody asks him to. I kind of want to explain that because, there's always the thing that agnostics and unbelievers always want to say is, that I can't believe in a God that lets this stuff happen. I can't believe in a God that lets people be mean to each other. He could stop people from murdering. He could stop people from raping. He could stop people from doing detestable acts. An all-powerful, almighty, good God could stop evil. But our story tells us he could. But the one dilemma of creation is that people are free to say, I don't want you here, please leave. And when God is absent, all of the horrible, unruly, evil things are free to run wild. Because God gives people the freedom to say, I don't want you here, please leave. So they can't quite understand it, but here's a good explanation of why God doesn't control these things, why God allows people free will. Ladies, have you ever had a young man pursue you? He might be sitting next to you. But ladies, how would you feel? It might be nice and flattering if a man showed up and tried to woo you. Tried to woo you by being nice to you, by being kind to you, by blessing you, doing various things to try to get your attention to say, hey, I would like to dedicate myself to loving and honoring you. And so he pursues you in that way. Might be flattering and nice, but if you are repulsed by the guy, you ought to be free to say, no thanks, please leave. I don't want you here. Isn't that the truth? Should you be allowed that? Because if he really loves you, he's not going to take you by the shoulders and say, I don't care what you want. You will love me whether you like it or not. You will love me. Would that be an image of love? So in the same way that we can understand that a man needs to leave a woman alone if she tells him, go away from me, I don't want you here, God has granted mankind to do the same thing with him. He pursues you, he woos you, he blesses you, but because he loves you, if you say, go away from me, I don't want you here, he respects that, and he does. That's the greatest dilemma for God's creation. The demons know that God has a day of basanizo. Basanizo, pain and suffering for Satan and his demons. It's been set up. The demons are surprised that you're already here because the day hasn't come yet. But the demons have taught us there is a day of judgment that is coming, a day of basanizo, pain and suffering and torment for all of eternity. And so a person must choose, must wake up. At some point in your life, you must choose whether your complete attention is going to stay dedicated to just keeping busy, just trying to fill your day and stay busy, trying to distract myself from the eventual truth about my finality, my death. I'm busy doing things to distract myself from that reality. A person can choose to continue trying to distract themselves until the end comes. Or there has to come a time where God is knocking on your heart and says, if you will, you can become a part of my eternal kingdom. If you want to, I won't force you to. And if you ask me to leave, I'll leave. But there is that other choice. Torment is waiting in judgment. The demons have told us it's coming. But God says, but I would prefer to bring you into joy and love and peace and happiness in my kingdom. God offers that to everyone today, but He won't force anyone. He says, no, you have to choose me. I have chosen you, but I'm not going to force you. You will have to choose me if you want me to bring you into the kingdom with me. I pray that that's kind of hit home. If anybody needs to make that choice, we'd like to give you that opportunity, at least get a start. Come forward while we sing this next song, and we can at least try to start you on the road to accepting God, to letting God in and making your way to that eternal kingdom, and in so doing, being able to avoid the eternal basanizo, eternal torment and suffering. Please come forward if you'd like to while we stand and sing.